Well, we want to welcome everybody to this latest episode and an installment of our stewardship video programs. And today we're interviewing Father Kevin, and we're looking forward to hearing his thoughts on the stewardship campaign and also on the larger mission of the church as he sees it. So, Kevin, thank you so much for being with us.
Of course.
And
I didn't want to miss out on being interviewed. You know,
well,
everybody else got
absolutely.
interviewed. I want to be
this
interviewed too.
This is big time. The first question is, what do you see as All Saints' mission in our community? You know, since you've been here, you've learned a lot, and what do you see as our mission currently?
Yeah. So when I came, you know, one of the things that interested me when I was looking at the profiles, and for those that don't know how all this works, when a church is hiring a new priest, they put a profile out into this thing called the Office of Transition Ministry, and the priest will have their own profile. It's kind of like Match.com, but for priests and churches. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was that this church was very involved in mission of justice and feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting those in prison, and all of those things. And so that was a great foundation to start with. And so I think we've done a really great job of continuing to do that even through the pandemic. But one of the things that I felt like was a growing edge, to use a cliched buzz term, was our connection to the community as a whole. When I came here, when I met people in the community, a lot of them didn't know that we existed. And that's very problematic for a church. And so what I've been working on, what I've been pushing us to do is to be more known. And so the first thing I did to try to bridge that gap, we split the outreach committee into two. We have the missions committee, which is kind of the focus of the old outreach committee. It's all of those things where we're going out, we're doing food pantries, and we're visiting people in prison. We just had a letter writing campaign from our kids to the Bedford prison. All of those things are mission. And then we started a new outreach committee, which Jim is on. And our focus is to get to know our community and to be known by our community. And so any way that we can do that, even our blessing of the pets is a way that we can get to know our community and to know our community. So that's really our focus when it comes to that. It's really to be a vital church, which I think is very important and essential to continuing on. To be a vital church, you have to be known. The story I always tell about vitality, the ministry I ran that I started in Savannah was called The Foundry. It was a coffee shop, but it was also not just a college ministry, but a ministry to the arts community of Savannah, to kind of the fringe marginalized freaks and weirdos, if you will, of Savannah. And we really understood that we were vital when we closed, and there was grief about us closing. When I left, the coffee shop closed about a year later, and there was an outpouring of sadness from the community. The community really felt like there was something missing because our ministry was gone. And that's part of being vital. You are looked on by the community, you're known, and you are seen as a vital part, as an essential part of the community. And so that's really what we're focusing on as we move forward.
Terrific. That's a great answer. So,
I'm full of great answers, Jeff.
I know, you really nailed that one. Thank you. So another question, which I think you touched upon, is what are the challenges that you're excited about in the short term for All Saints Church?
I mean, the biggest challenge is doing all this during COVID. So, you know, it's hard to get out in the community if none of us are allowed to go out in the community. It's hard to invite people in to what we're doing if we can't invite anybody in because we're doing everything remotely. So, I mean, that's the biggest challenge, is finding new ways to be engaged in the community. And not just that, but continuing on all of these great mission projects and initiatives that we've had. So, we're still figuring out how we do that.
Are we considering a large drive-in theater screen type of situation right there in the parking lot?
Sit in your
And
car.
just, the service and whatever can be on that?
No,
That's not one of
that's
those.
not going to
We're
happen.
not going to consider that?
No, that's not going to
That's
happen.
not,
no.
it's not in the works.
That-
Those
that's
rumors
not-
are false.
Those rumors are false. No, we're going to continue doing what we're doing. I expect this Omicron will be a somewhat shorter wave, and we'll go back to meeting in person. We'll certainly do this summer. We'll do some mass in the grass type stuff. It's a great way to be present. And then, as things open up, I've already begun being involved in different committees and whatnot and organizations in the community. I'll ask you guys to come along with me, and I'm hoping to at least lead that initiative from the front and by example.
Terrific.
Number 3.
3.
What's your philosophy on financial giving as it relates to the church?
So financial giving is tough. We were talking earlier before we turned the camera on that the approach to giving is very different now. Each generation has a very different approach. Certainly the golden generation who are slowly moving into the sunset had a very different approach and philosophy of giving. It was just a given. As we move through the generations, we have about 5 generations represented in the church. As we move through the generations, it becomes increasingly important for those generations to see that we are actually living out the mission of Jesus. What I've found in a lot of my ministry with young people and what I call the emerging generations is that there's a huge disconnect from what they see the church doing or being and how they understand Jesus. They understand Jesus to be loving, compassionate, somebody who speaks out and serves the oppressed and the marginalized. And a lot of times they see in somebody who is always out with other people. And sometimes the church is seen as being this very insular club that's only worried about themselves. So part of my philosophy is doing all of those things that I just talked about, is being out in the community, is really being Jesus's hands and feet in the community. And so that when we ask people to give, they know why they're giving. They're not giving because we want to keep the lights on. They're not giving to pay for staff or roofs to be fixed. We are giving because we know we're living out the mission of the church. So that's one part of it. I think from a personal perspective, my perspective on giving and just finances and living as a whole has always been live simply so others can simply live. I think we're called to live simply and modestly as people of faith so that we can use our extra resources to do those things, to do those works of justice. That comes from my Methodist background. The early Methodists would build these very simple churches, church buildings, because they believed that the majority of the plate should go to feeding the hungry and educating those who were educated and doing those acts that the early Methodists did. And we can still live out that philosophy. So my philosophy on giving is simply that, we should be living simply so that we have an abundance to give so that others can simply live.
Lovely. All right, so in a related question, if All Saints Church raises more money through pledging, where do you think we'd be best suited to use it?
It's a great question. So, I think, I think I'm a dreamer, and so I always have these grandiose dreams. In any ministry setting that I've been in, I think I would love to have more resources to use um, to meet the needs of families in the community, and some of that remains to be seen what that means, because I've only been here during COVID times, but I suspect we have lots of young families in our community that have needs of, even if it's something simply as getting away for a date and having those kind of. I know this church in the past has done nights where we'll babysit people's kids so that young families can go on dates. But there's
Sometimes we lose one or two.
yeah, as long as you come, 90% retention rate. Those kind of ways that we can think about how we can use our funds to reach and serve young families would be great. Even if that's bringing in another staff member that can help really focus on those initiatives, that would be great. But I think we have such a great foundation of how we're serving those in poverty and marginalized in our community. Anything that we have more, we can go towards that.
Very good. And one other question we had was, we know that getting involved in the community is one of your priorities, and you've actually taken steps to do that. And I know we talked about the restrictions with COVID, but on the other hand, you have been out in the community and you have met with some of the local people, and could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. So I always have been able to boil ministry down to relationships, and that's really the heart of ministry. And so anywhere I am, I try to build relationships with folks outside of the church. I think we all should have ways in which we are engaged in the larger community outside of our church. In the past, I've coached soccer. I have, I ran a coffee shop that certainly was outside of the bounds. I was a substitute teacher. Here, I've been able to meet some of the local elected officials. I was on the police reform committee for Briarcliff. There's some other committees that I've been asked to consider being on, and I'm certainly considering being on them. I try to go to events that the community puts on. And as silly as it sounds, I try to spend one day a week at a coffee shop just so I can build relationships outside of the church. That's the only way that we can start building relationships outside of these walls, is to be out there and present. And it sounds silly and simple, but it makes a huge impact to be seen and to see people.
Absolutely, that's great.
All right, so this is part of our stewardship campaign. So when we're asking people to give a pledge to All Saints, what would you want them to focus on?
In what way?
Well, when they're considering whether to pledge, or they're considering how much to pledge,
Okay.
what would you ask them to keep in mind as they're making those choices?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of different approaches. We still have that kind of tithe mentality stuck in our heads, this 10%, and that those kind of percentages don't always work. I would encourage everyone to make a pledge for this year, and even if it's small, even if what you can give is small, that is amazing. I mean, we have kind of the seminal teaching or scripture verse that's used to talk about giving is the widow's mite. The story where Jesus and his buddies are sitting in the temple and they're watching all the very wealthy people go, and in some accounts, very flashily throwing in just penance of what they have into the coffers, and this widow, this older woman who really had no means, because widows had no means of income, comes into the temple and gives everything she has, which is very little. These other folks are giving all of this money out of their wealth and out of their abundance, but it's just a drop in the bucket. And this woman is giving all that she has. And I'm not saying we should give all that we have, what I'm asking is that everyone consider how they can at least make a start. If you haven't given before, find a way, a little notch in your budget where you can make a start. If you've already been giving, how can you live simply so that we have more to give those that need to just simply live? That's the challenge, and I know that's not easy. Especially for those of us who are a part of these younger generations who don't have a mentality where we were taught about giving in this way. It's really hard to do an about face and start doing that. But I have found with my own life there is a sense of peace with giving, and I wish I could explain that more than peace, but that's what it is. So yeah, I would say this year, as we're approaching 2022, as we're kind of coming out of COVID, I hope, is how can you expand what you've already done, even if it's a fraction of a percent, even if it's just starting with $5 a week for a first-time giver. How can you kind of look at your budget and find a place, and remembering that what we're giving to is the expansion of the kingdom of God. It's clothing the hungry, or clothing the naked, feeding the hungry, visiting the people in prison, finding ways to spread love and compassion and healing in our community. That's really what we're doing when we give to the church.
And I know from talking to Mike and with Jeff too, we talked about facilitating that, especially during COVID, giving people more options, online options and things like that, so that they don't feel they have to be physically present to make those donations, which is so important, because a lot of people, most people, the younger people do everything online,
right?
And so they're not oriented toward the plate as much. So I just wondered if there's anything that you see going on there.
Yeah, so when I got here, we switched church database software, in thinking that COVID would go away in a few months and we could really have this robust program to jump into. And it's great, and I think it's going to be a great, robust program for us. But one of the main reasons we did it was to integrate giving into our database. So everybody can go on Realm. I'll put up at the end of this video, I'll put up a link so everyone can see the link. But you can go on Realm to our page, to the All Saints page, and you can create a profile for yourself. And through that profile, you're able to give online. It's an integrated kind of thing. You can do a one-time gift. You can even set up a reoccurring deposit. So I know for me, any of the reoccurring bill pay things that I can do just makes it easier for me. I know statistically, the generations below me, millennials and Gen Z, that's just how they're used to giving. They give to nonprofits. You guys who are those people, you give to nonprofits and you do it by reoccurring gifts. And so we have that ability to do that. We also on Sundays, when we have our little box out, I need to get another thing for our plate, but there's a QR code that you can get with your phone to link you straight to the online giving as well.
That's great. And we are going to have one final video session going through some of those items, just to get people up to speed as to the newest things.
Yeah, there's some great videos that we have through that company that explain all of those things and how to do that on a little more robust, a little more technical. I am not the computer savvy
and
person.
I can't wait for Edipuzzo and Ken Alagian to do that for us.
Right.
You know that neither one has agreed to actually do the video yet, but I think at this point,
It's about time.
they haven't said they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And in Churchland, that's good enough.
That's right.
Final thoughts?
Just any other things you'd like to convey?
Any final thoughts?
No, I just appreciate this church is full of generous people. I came from a very different ministry prior, in between doing the Foundry and my college students and coming here, I worked with the homeless. So, this is a night and day kind of almost whiplash ministry-wise. But what I found when I came here, and I had an inkling of it during the interview process, but what I found is that All Saints is a loving and simple and generous group of people. And we've been very fortunate where some churches have really struggled through COVID and with giving, and you guys have really stepped up. And some of you, even during the heart of COVID, have given more than you had in the previous years, and that's incredible and amazing. So I am very thankful to not have to go around and do lots of crazy fundraising like I used to, and to have a church that's just already wired for generous giving.
I think the last question I would have is just that, we're living in very, very, very challenging times right now in a lot of ways, and I think that the church's role has become so much more significant in this context. And I just wonder if you could speak to that, because I know in your sermons you often mention the fact that we have to make choices.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're living in a scary time period. I think this is a time to really set aside time for prayer and meditation and introspection. It's a time to set aside time for yourself to just be. And it's definitely a time to reach out to others, because there are a lot of people who just aren't okay. They know they look like everything's going great, but they may be struggling on the inside. So, certainly while I have a very outward-facing focus for ministry, the church is a community, and this is a time where we need to be checking on each other and making sure that everybody's okay. And whether or not that has anything to do with stewardship, I mean, it really does, because stewardship's more than just money. Stewardship's about all of the things we've been given. And so we have to be careful with our time and make sure that we're generously giving of that to others and to ourselves.
Thank you. Good. Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you.
All right.